The report found the security service failed to act on critical intelligence relating to the suicide bomber Salman Abedi. It also found he could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. A lawyer for the family spoke outside the inquiry, saying the victims had been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to Prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Well, the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, says MI5 has made changes since the attack.
I know that all of us are working to make sure that the improvements that need to be made are made. Already more than 100 changes have been done, and no doubt this report will highlight others. The Home Secretary and I support MI5 in making those changes.
In other news today, police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in woodland close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded the authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter.
At this stage, we have not yet been able to confirm the baby's gender, and a post-mortem examination has not yet taken place. Despite this, based on our inquiries we've carried out so far, we believe, sadly, the baby may have been dead for some time before they were found. It's too early for us to provide a more specific date.
Politics now, and a Labour source has told GBNews that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's new Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role at the Cabinet Office to take up the position in the Labour Party. A Downing Street spokesman said the resignation had been accepted with immediate effect, and the Labour leader is delighted. And John Swinney has confirmed he'll step down as Deputy First Minister of Scotland. Swinney's announcement follows the resignation of SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon. The longest-serving Scottish Deputy First Minister describes his 15 years in office as a privilege. And Boris Johnson has expressed concerns over Rishi Sunak's new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Speaking in Westminster, the former Prime Minister said he'd find it very difficult to vote for the Windsor framework, saying it wasn't about the UK taking back control. The deal with the EU aims to fix post-Brexit trade problems in Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson also admitted he'd made mistakes in signing the Northern Ireland Protocol that caused the DUP to walk out of power sharing.
I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again.
Matt Hancock has been saying today he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his text to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. But she then passed them on to the Telegraph, and the paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with the then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Matt Hancock reportedly said he was mounting a rearguard action to close schools in December 2020, despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Meanwhile, teachers in Wales and the south of England have been on strike today in a dispute over pay. That's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and in the Midlands. The Education Secretary had invited teaching unions to take part in talks on the condition the strikes were suspended. but they're demanding a pay offer that is better first. Further national strikes in England and Wales are planned for March the 15th and 16th. That's your latest news. I'm back in an hour. More now from Michelle.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got Martin Daubney, the former Brexit Party MEP, and Aaron Bastani, the founder of Novara Media. Good evening. Welcome, gents. You're both looking very smart tonight.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. They're making an effort, everyone, for you at home. And speaking of you at home, what's on your mind tonight? Get in touch with me. GBViews at gbnews.uk is how you can reach me. Twitter is your thing. You can tweet me there at GBNews. Lots of stuff to get into tonight. Lots of you already getting in contact. You'll be aware that the final tranche of the report into the Manchester Arena bombing has been released today. We'll get into that in just a sec. But Carol says, Michelle, sorry, it's just not good enough for Manchester victims. When will we ever learn? I've got to say, Carol, I hate to be the burden of bad news, but I worry that we won't learn. We hear this phrase, don't we, lessons learned, all the time across all different areas, and we don't really seem to learn them, do we? But if you're just kind of playing catch-up, wondering what's going on, as I said, the third and final part now has been released today and has found, and I quote, that there was a significant missed opportunity to prevent this attack. The chair of the inquiry, Sir John Saunders, said that there was a realistic possibility that investigators could have stopped the bombing if they had acted on two important pieces of evidence back in 2017. By the way, it also found that the bomber's family held significant responsibility for his extremist beliefs, but we'll come on to that because they were kind of outside the remit and didn't contribute to the inquiry at all. But Martin Daubney, your thoughts on this?
Well, you're right to say that it wasn't the first time. So about 10 years ago, I worked on a case of a man called Junaid Hussain, who was an Islamist hacker who escaped Britain on bail and became a key target in Syria. He ended up being eviscerated by a drone, I would say rot in hell. And he was openly recruiting British Muslims on Facebook, radicalising them online in full plain sight. And we were phoning MI5, we were phoning top cops and saying, look at this. I went to the King's College International Centre for Radicalisation and I spoke to them in person. I said, what are you doing about this guy? And the answer was nothing. And now we see history.
Really? So
yes.
You went and they said, you said what we're doing. They said nothing.
Well, he was on their radar, but tough. He escaped bail, left the country, and became a significant part of the Islamic State. And he wanted to eradicate our way of life. The same with Abadi. Now, we're not talking about a guy here who sent a few malicious tweets. He actively participated in a war in Libya in 2011. He photographed himself with a giant submachine gun taken from a jeep. And he came from a family, a background of terrorists, had a deep hatred of our way of life. This isn't some guy who was just being nasty on Facebook. And then he was downloading recipes of how to make bombs, and he could have been intercepted. Now, as for could Prevent have prevented this? I would say the Shawcross report recently showed that the Prevent mechanism is completely unfit for purpose. People are slipping through the cracks. There's a terror, I believe, of being called racist or Islamophobic through who we pursue. And that's how people like this get through the net. It's a disgrace.
And I want to come back to that point in a minute. But for now, Aaron, where do you stand on this report out today?
Well, Martin makes a very convincing case, but I think the biggest story here is that in the case of Salman Abedi, MI5 and MI6 were acting at odds with one another. MI5's job is domestically to keep us safe. MI6 is about external affairs. It's the James Bond spy agency. And what we know in 2016, 17 and many years before that is that control orders on terror suspects precisely like Salman Abedi were lifted. They were allowed to travel with impunity, without any restrictions, to war zones like Libya and Syria. Why? Because it suited the foreign or the perceived foreign policy interests of this country. MI6 said, well, we don't like Bashar al-Assad, we don't like Gaddafi, send as many extremists and radicals as you like. Now, that may have helped to overthrow those two men, but it certainly wasn't keeping people in this country safe. And that, to me, is a big story, which this third part of the report doesn't really discuss. MI5, yes, of course, they failed to do their job, absolutely. But why on earth is MI6 allowing people, young men like Abedi, 16, to fight in Libya and then come back and behave like nothing has happened at all? I find it extraordinary.
So what do you reckon should have happened then? What, he should have been kept in Libya or what?
Well, I think there should have been a control order. I don't think people should have been allowed to travel to Libya, particularly 16-year-old boys. And I think clearly there's been, and I think this is probably what has happened, is there was an absence of meaningful conversation between MI5 and MI6 about precisely who they should be keeping tabs on. MI6 clearly have a list of people who are highly dangerous because they literally allowed them to travel into these war zones. So we're hearing a lot about MI5 today. I think we should also be hearing something about MI6. We're not, because I think actually that will anger people even more.
But that makes no sense to me. You think that we're not hearing about it because we don't want to overly infuriate and upset people. Surely, you've just seen the whole kind of Shamima Begum. I'm not saying it's the same, but it's similar in ways. Surely, though, that is in the public interest to be out. I think it was outside of the scope of this inquiry, perhaps, which is why we don't have the level of detail that you're perhaps suggesting that we should. But what do you think should happen then? Another inquiry into that component, or what?
Peter Oborne wrote a great piece, Conservative, wrote a great piece about this in the Mail in 2017. And he said that MI5 does their best to keep us safe. It's failed in this instance, of course. And he said that MI6, with this interventionist policy of allowing extremists to travel abroad just because they're fighting people we don't particularly like, are actually endangering the safety of people in this country. That's what he said. So I think there clearly needs to be a rethink with regards to MI6. My point here is just generally, it's far more complicated than what we're hearing right now. It isn't just MI5 were asleep at the wheel. MI6 have a policy, which some people would argue, me included, means that people in this country are made less safe, not more.
Let's pick up on this political correctness point that you just raised, Martin, because I do think it is an interesting and important one. And I think it was in the first part of the report, because obviously 3 parts. The first part, one of the things that came out was that this fellow was kind of loitering around with this backpack. He looked, out of place. And the guys didn't dare radio through and kind of flag this because he didn't want to be regarded as a potential racist and all the rest of it. How much of a part do you think all of that played in the goings-on here?
I think it plays a significant part, and it also did in the Rotherham grooming gang scandal, also did in the Junaid Hussain case I mentioned. And the facts are the facts. When we look at terror deaths and terror arrests on British soil, the overriding majority are of Muslim men. Now, that's not to say that all Muslim men do that, of course not. But 56% of all terror arrests are Muslim men versus 6.5% of the population. Those are just the facts. Now, if we can just see through the perceptions of racism and Islamophobia and deal with the truth, we might get somewhere. Unfortunately, we can't. And back to Aaron's point of MI6 allowing people to kind of wander out of the country to fight wars, that goes contrary to what Junaid Hussain did. He jumped bail. He first went to Turkey, then he went over the border. Same with Shamima Begum. And I think you're right to bring that case up, because isn't it funny how we're saying that we shouldn't be allowing people back from war zones into the UK because there's much higher risk of them committing terror atrocities? Of course there is. It stands to reason. They fought in an arena of war alongside Islamic State. Yet we are saying Shamima Begum, particularly from the Liberal left, should be allowed to come back. And I think we have to have a no-holds-barred conversation about the realities of the risks versus this fear of being called racist. And
that's fair, isn't it, Aaron?
Well, I would say Shamima Begum should stand trial. She should face British justice, just like the Nazis did after the Second World War.
She might get away with it, though, because...
It's a separate point. I mean, and I think it's a valid point. I don't dispute that. But my view is you've committed a crime, you should face a court and British justice. Just my view. And I think the same should have happened with Abedi. The point is, MI6 was allowing people like him to travel freely in and out of the country. He should have been arrested the minute he was back in this country, because he was aiding and abetting a terrorist organisation overseas.
Agree.
And yet, actually, he's part of the plan. Well, you're fighting Bashar al-Assad. Fine. Well, we'll give you a free pass. Not good enough.
And what do you think about this whole political, the political correct, not wanting to call things out and all the rest of it for fear of being called racist? Do you think that's contributed to the situation?
I don't know. I don't know what was going on in these gentlemen's heads. Look, they're security guards at a major event in 2017. this kind of attack has happened before, it stands to reason you should do your job and probably stop the guy entering if he's got a massive backpack on. I find it somewhat surreal that this did happen. I think many of our viewers have probably seen video footage of it. It looks strange that he managed to even enter the building. So, yes, there's clearly many failures here. I don't know what was going on in their heads, whether or not they were worried about being called racists. Frankly, if somebody's white, brown or black, if they're walking around with a giant backpack in an area like that, I think...
In a child's concert.
You should have a word with them, yeah.
I absolutely think that there is this situation where people are frightened to get involved because they don't want to be called names. And it harps back, for me, I think 2016, again in Manchester, the Trafford Centre. It's always stuck in my head as this. They did a rehearsal, an overnight rehearsal in the Trafford Centre to preempt a terror attack and make sure that everyone knew what they were doing, rehearse their response to it. And at the start of the role play that they were doing, basically, was that someone went into the shopping centre and blew himself up. So at the start of this role play, they shouted the phrase Allah Akbar. And it was, they were hugely criticised for it. And people then came out, so I've got some of the quotes here. So the Assistant Chief Constable at the time came out and said an apology. We apologise for the offence that's been caused. The Greater Manchester Police Crime Commissioner came out as well and said it was ill-judged and unnecessary and unacceptable decision for those to be playing the part of terrorists to have shouted that phrase before setting off their fake bombs. Well, I would say it wasn't unnecessary and ill-judged and all the rest of it. It was actually a probability that would have been the threat that they faced at the time and therefore an essential part of their role play, but yet they end up apologising for it.
Well, you're clearly trying to model a situation which you want to prevent, right? And so I personally have no issue with it. Maybe I'm a bad leftist. I mean, I personally have no issue with it. If you were trying to model a far-right terrorist, you'd do something similar, right? You would have something like what Thomas Mayer said when he killed Joe Cox. So simulating what you're trying to prevent seems a very fair and reasonable thing to do. If they came in for criticism for that, I think that's unreasonable.
And when you look at the latest data, the Terrorism in Great Britain House of Commons Library report from last year showed of 93 terror deaths in Britain on British soil 2003 till 21. 93 total, only 2 were put down to the far right, and even then, one of them was just not associated with anybody else. The vast majority of deaths on British soil have been caused by Islamist terrorists. This is the reality. And to put it through a filter of being afraid to apprehend in case it offends is actually part of the problem.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't help. As I said, I'll always keep harping back to that example in 2016 because I just think you absolute pillocks. You know, why would you apologise for something that was quite realistic and an essential part of what it is that you were trying to do? And when you come out and you do these ridiculous apologies, then you actually enable these kind of things to keep going on because then people think, oh, well, I better not say and do that because it is wrong. Rachel says this inquiry will not solve anything. You're saying one of the challenges is people just simply do not want to offend others. Patricia says, Michelle, why does everyone expect these people to be able to catch everybody? It's such a shame in this country that we have a blame game. These people have stopped so many attacks. They are brave men and women who work quietly in the shadows to keep us all safe. She thinks that they deserve praise, not criticism. What's your thoughts on that? Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, have you heard the news today? I laugh because sometimes I just think some things in this country, they are just laughable, quite frankly. But anyway, the senior civil service servant behind the Partygate report that some would say brought Boris Johnson down has now been offered the job as a chief of staff to Sir Keir Starmer over in the Labour Party. What do you make to that? Give me your thoughts and I'll see you in 3.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Martin Daubney is the former Brexit Party MEP, and Aaron Bastani is the founder of Novara Media. Welcome back, everybody. We've just been talking about the final part of the report into the Manchester Arena bombing that has been published today. Ken says, forget MI5, the security on the night was appalling. How did this guy get into the arena with such a big backpack? Worry not, by the way, Ken, because the security on the night, that came in for a bit of a kicking as well. In part 1 of the report, this is part 3, part 2, focused a lot on the emergency services and the lack of joined up response there. Mike, echoing that sentiment, it was too late once he'd got in that arena with his backpack on. Bernard says, hindsight is a wonderful thing, Michelle, but people are not perfect and life is not perfect. It's sad what's happened, but these guys have more than one potential terrorist to police. Yes, I think it's more than sad what happened, quite frankly, but you wouldn't be suggesting that you don't think we should be doing these reports and stuff, would you, Bernard? Let me know your thoughts on that. Lots of support, by the way, coming through for MI5, MI6 and all the rest of it, for keeping us safe, because unfortunately we hear about the attacks that do happen, don't we? Many, of course, are prevented. Now let's move on. Do you remember the Partygate debacle? Well, the lady that brought all of that kind of to a head, Sue Gray, many of you will recall her. She, guess what? She's got a new job, or been offered one at least. She's going over to join Keir Starmer's Labour Party if that appointment gets approved. You will remember Boris Johnson called this a stitch up worse than the Bayeux tapestry. This has divided opinion, Aaron Bastani. Some people saying, so what? People move jobs all the time. What's your problem? Other people are saying, whoa there, Tiger. This demonstrates that there was an agenda. After all, the civil service are not unbiased. Where do you stand on it?
I think it's awful news, and I think it's fundamentally bad because it undermines the perception of neutrality and impartiality in the civil service, and that's hugely important. You've already seen a tweet from Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, look, we knew all along this wasn't a fair process. Now, some people agree, some people disagree. I'm not impugning Sue Gray's reputation. I've never met the woman. I have no idea about what goes on in her mind. But clearly, I think it's inappropriate for somebody who wrote let's be real, the Partygate report was the sword of Damocles over Boris Johnson's head. This isn't just any old civil servant. And I think, frankly, she should be putting the reputation and neutrality of the civil service above her own personal career ambitions. She hasn't. I think that's bad. Let's see. I mean, Rishi Sunak still has in his power potentially to stop it. But I think it's very bad. And I think the people that sort of respond and say, well, what's the problem? This is normal. The civil service is meant to be supremely apolitical. And this is just one more sort of slash, frankly, a beleaguered institution. And it matters to all of us, whether you're Conservative, Labour, Liberal, Democrat. It matters to all of us to have an effective civil service. This doesn't help that.
Martin, your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm hoping at some point we'll find something to disagree on, because I completely agree with what you're saying, except I'll put it the other way around, and that is for anybody who's followed the civil service or his pals or knocks about with Conservative MPs, as I do, or even Labour MPs, it's very, very obvious and has been for ages. The civil service is not apolitical. It's been accused, quite rightly, I think, of, for example, laying down stumbling blocks to legislation on Brexit. They're very anti-Brexit in the civil service. They're very of a mindset politically, say much more of a metropolitan BBC mindset than an electoral representative mindset. So it comes as no surprise to me that somebody like Sue Gray would be, if you like, the premium product of that background. And it's absolutely no surprise to me that the woman responsible for the report that brought down Boris has been heralded by the Labour Party as a hugely significant appointment to bring great credit to their party. I think there's no surprise whatsoever. The civil service is biased, it's woke, it's riddled with anti-Brexit. They're trying to stop Rwanda, they're trying to stop all sorts of things that the electorate want. And this
I think it's more the lawyers that try and stop Rwanda, isn't it? I think it's more those guys.
Well, they won't even return to work. And when Jacob Rees-Mogg says, well, get back to your desks, they won't even do that. So I think there's no surprise whatsoever that the civil service is biased against the Conservatives.
You know, and a minute ago you were just saying about the perception of neutrality in the civil service and what this will do to damage that. Do you think it's realistic to have this vision that actually people are neutral? Because you call it perception neutral, I would call it a bit of a delusion, because in real life, who actually in the real world is neutral, honestly?
Sure. So in the media, I think it's useful to be honest about your political views personally. So, for instance, I say I'm on the left. And so when I say that, the recipient of the information knows where I'm coming from. In the BBC, where people say, I don't have any political views of mine, I don't think that's right as a journalist. But I do think that civil servants should at least try to serve the public interest. And, of course, perfect neutrality and objectivity, you're right, it's inhuman. It's very hard to do. But that should be an aspiration. And going on Martin's point about the civil service trying to obstruct Tory legislation since 2019. To a certain extent, of course, that's true. I would argue that even if you had a Corbyn government, they would have done something quite similar. There is an analysis, and maybe this is where we disagree, where the civil service really doesn't like big structural change because, large bureaucracies are like, it's like Titanic. It takes a very long time to turn. The problem is, in the 21st century, we've got a lot of icebergs around. You don't want to hit them. So I think there's a broader criticism to be made here of the civil service than just their left wing. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think there would have been many problems also for a Corbyn government or any sort of left-wing government. I don't think Starmer will be a left-wing government coming from the civil service.
Martin, this has got to be rubber stamped, essentially approved, this appointment by a committee that ultimately gets decided by Rishi Sunak. Do you think he should approve this appointment?
I think it will get approved.
But do you think it should?
I'm all for the free market, to be honest. And I think if this is a free market appointment, the Labour Party are, I think, put it through. And make of that what you will. The very fact that it's been suggested, I think, by the Labour Party, and that Sue Gray presumably is receptive to this, shows that the intent and the will is there to be biased. And so to block it, I think, becomes then political. It's made political by the Conservatives when they block it. They're making more of a deal about it rather than letting it go through and actually just fighting the election on the issues that really matter. And really, who's in charge of Keir Starmer's chief of staff is very interesting to journalists and politicos, but on the doorstep, no one's going to give them monkeys.
Well, Francis has just said Starmer's hypocrisy knows no bounds. He's denied his own Partygate. I think you're on about that drink. The beer, aren't you, that was photographed through the window in Durham.
Keir's beers.
Keir's beers. You're saying he's backed Corbyn and then a second referendum, flip-flops all over. What is in this for Keir Starmer, Aaron, this appointment?
Well, it's about government. And clearly, if you want to run a government, you want a senior civil servant at the top of the organisation in the Labour Party. He'll take us straight into number 10, into presumably she would be a special advisor to number 10. And you have a really good understanding of the machinery of government. I get that. I think there's an argument for it. I don't think that no civil servant should be able to go and work for political parties. I think it's generally quite bad. But I think with Sue Gray, the person who defenestrated a Conservative Prime Minister, I think it's particularly bad. So I can see the rationale for a civil servant. Of course, Jonathan Powell was a senior civil servant before working for Tony Blair in a similar role. But I think the political optics of this are quite bad. And what Martin said about nobody caring, I mean, Boris Johnson was removed without a democratic election, and the central figure in that is now working for the opposition political party.
Well,
I think people will care about that.
Let's throw it out to you at home. Do you care? You can be the judge. Get in touch. Tell me, do you care about this appointment or not? Do you think as well it should happen, because it does have to be rubber stamped and approved? So do you reckon Rishi should give the nod to it or not? I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, Lee Anderson, he has been in trouble again today. He's been upsetting people, apparently. What he's saying is that people that are financially struggling, perhaps one of the core reasons is that they're not as resourceful as they should be, and indeed as people used to be. Is he right? Give me your examples, and I'll see you in 3.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got Martin Daubney, the former Brexit Party MEP, and Aaron Bastani, the founder of Novara Media. There's lots of love coming in for you two tonight. People appreciating the debate. We like that. There's also apparently lots of feedback coming in, like this one from Angela. She says, Michelle, I love your show, but please can you stop showing your lacy underwear? It's distracting my husband from cooking dinner. Well, I'll say two things to that, Angela. First things first, wowzers, how great to have a husband that cooks dinner. I wouldn't mind a piece of that, quite frankly. That's wonderful. Secondly, this is not my bra. Many people have been writing in, apparently, about this exact same topic. I wouldn't come on national television with my bra hanging out, nor are my bosoms so big they require anything pretty much up to my neck. So rest assured, Angela's husband, you're not sitting there seeing my undies, right? So let's move on, shall we? By the way, I asked you if you cared about the Sue Gray appointment. It seems like, yes, you do. And you're having none of it, by the way. Ian says, Michelle, if it looks, moves and smells like a fish, it's a fish. The Sue Gray appointment is fishy. And that sentiment, I have to say, is echoed a lot. Many of you saying this just demonstrates that the civil service are basically biased. I was asking you, though, how realistic is it actually to imagine that they're not? Is anyone really neutral? Your thoughts, keep them coming in. But for now, let's move on. Lee Anderson, the Tory MP, of course, you'll be familiar with him. He's been speaking out today saying that he believes that one of the reasons that people are struggling so much is basically they're not as resourceful as perhaps they could be and as people once were. He talks about his former life, his earlier life, and he talks about many aspects, actually, Marty. He gives loads of different examples. People used to grow food, people used to take on extra work, they used to do all manner of different things. What do you make to what he said?
I think Lee Anderson's appointment as Deputy Chair of the Conservatives has been inspired because people cannot help themselves but react to everything he says. You know, he makes people's heads rotate on the other side of the chamber. The Liberal media can't sort of leave him alone. And I think he's got an excellent point. So, again, as Aaron said, full disclosure, I stood against Lee Anderson in Ashfield. My mum's lived there for 25 years. I'm from the same part of the world as him. He was a coal miner. My dad was a miner. He talks about going to caravan holidays in Skegness. That's how I spent my childhood. And my father and his grandfather and all of us grew vegetables and we got by because we came from an era of genuine poverty, post-war poverty, where the country was on its knees and self-sustenance was a virtue. And also, we were taught at school how to cook. My mother was a home economics teacher. We were taught how to make good and mend, how to get by. And we certainly weren't a community. There was full work then for those who wanted it, who depended on benefits. And we have a societal flip on its head of that situation now. And I think Lee has got a point. To live in denial of the fact that people use food banks while also buying McDonald's, as he says here, is to be in denial of reality. It just does happen. Now, that doesn't mean that people are scrounging and taking the mickey out of the system. It just does happen. And I think he's got a very good point. We should be teaching. When he says, let's cook meals for 30p, he's called 30p Lee and the sort of six bob knob, as they call him. But when Jack Monroe says it on the left, she's a hero of the working classes. And I think this comes down to something quite fundamental, and that is the Liberal left cannot stand a Conservative sticking up for the working classes and talking truth.
Aaron, is that right?
Strong words. You know, I think of my mum. She's passed away now, but I think of my mum when I see Lee Anderson because she was a working class Conservative, and she would have loved a lot of what he says. The videos about how to do up your tie, polish your shoes, she would have loved all that. But when he says that nurses don't really need food banks, I think she probably will go, I don't think that's quite right. I think a lot of the optics stuff, the theatre, he's very good at, and I agree, he's an inspired choice for Deputy Chair. In terms of this, about the vegetables thing, look, firstly, it presumes you have a garden, OK? In Newham or Hackney or Islington, we have really high child poverty. Those people live in flats. That's just a start. And it's very inefficient to grow your own vegetables, right? So, as anybody who gardens, I do, I'm a very poor gardener. As anybody who gardens knows, it's a lot of time and the return on time spent is not very effective. You should just really be working. What I am really happy to see is Lee Anderson defending 1970s social democracy. How this country was a better place with higher rates of unionisation. You could get on the housing ladder when it was cheap. And we had an upwardly mobile society. That's all been lost over the last 50 years. And I think I would be interested to see why Lee Anderson thinks that is.
Well, I would counter that's due to the ripping apart of the industrial heartlands of England and the Midlands and the North. I mean, you know, the areas he's talking about, we had basically full employment. There was work if you wanted work, and it was a source of great shame to be on benefits back in the day, back in the 70s. It just was. Like, nobody was on benefits unless they really genuinely needed it. And when that was the case, of course, society should be there as a safety net. I think what he's trying to say now, and the evidence is clear in places like Ashfield, that the incentive to work is less when you can get as much money on a benefits culture. And that is what he is saying. It pays to be in benefits. Oftentimes, the same kind of money, he hears it all the time from his constituents, and I do too, coming from that part of Britain. It simply is a case that we have a benefits-dependent culture. And the reason that exists is because the industrial heartlands were never replaced with meaningful work. And so, therefore, these communities...
And whose fault was that?
Well, the mines were shut down. They were inefficient. More mines were shut under the Labour Party than Margaret Thatcher, of course, and I'm no Conservative. My dad worked through the coal strike. You know, I come from that part of the world. But the fact of the matter is...
But it starts with Thatcher.
Well, no, it started way before that. Harold Wilson shut down more pits than Thatcher, but Thatcher was the end game.
The deindustrialisation. It starts with Thatcher, and I agree, it gets very bad under Blair, but it starts with Thatcher.
Yeah, but it also started under Blair in terms of mass immigration and open borders, and that's another thing that...
You've moved the goalpost there, haven't you?
No. I'm
just saying deindustrialisation. We can talk about that as well, but you started with deindustrialisation. It starts with Thatcher.
But what replaced it? The answer is nothing. And what filled that chasm was benefits culture, and what filled that was a lack of self-reliance and an increase in state reliance. That, I think, is the problem.
Let me pick you up quickly, if I may, this point you say about nurses and food banks and all the rest of it. I think what Lee Anderson's point was, and do you agree with this, that the notion of people having to go to food banks when they're earning £30,000+ a year, it has almost become this wheeled out kind of nurses need food banks, firemen need food banks, and really, how many nurses? What are their circumstances? That's, I think, what he's getting at. Do you disagree with that?
Yes, I do disagree with it. If you look at, for instance, a BT call centre worker earns around £19,000–20,000 a year. If you have a child and you earn that much money and you're raising the child by yourself, I mean, he's saying that...
But nurses don't earn 19 grand a year, do they?
No, I'm just saying, though, you know, he's saying, well, if you can't raise children and have them, he raised... Good for him, by the way. He raised 3 children by himself. He talks about if you don't, you know, if you don't have kids, then you won't need the cash. Well, actually, child benefit in this country was introduced, I believe, by Labour, in the late 1940s. So it's been around for a long time. I'm sure he benefited from it. Many people do need food banks. Somebody who, for instance, is an apprentice. You know, I think the minimum wage for apprentices in this country, £4 or £5 an hour. So many people do need them. OK, the question is, how high does that go?
Most apprentices... most, not all, because you can go up to whatever age. Most of them are young kids that live with a mum and dad.
Not all of them.
I mean, of course, not all of them, but they're out.
They should be paid more. They should be paid more.
Well, I did an apprenticeship. I won't take you all the way back to my youth because I'll be here all day and I've only got a couple of minutes. I did an apprenticeship. I got about 30 quid a week, and I managed to live, run a car, save a deposit for a house by doing extra part-time work and all the rest of it. I guess with me, I just worry a little bit that this food bank usage is being weaponised a little bit and used as a political bash. Of course, I do concede that some people need food banks, and I think that's wrong in this country, but the overuse of it, the confetti-like way the sentence is used, it doesn't really sit well with me, does it with you? Give me your thoughts. Anyway, was you watching my show yesterday? And if you were you one of those people that kept shouting at me, move on, stop talking about COVID and lockdown? Well, guess what today? And never get this, everyone. It was apparently considered briefly, albeit, that maybe cats were possibly responsible for transmitting COVID. There was a suggestion floated that maybe people might need to kill their animals. Really? Please, do you see the lunacy of what was going on in these days? Do you still think we need to move on from it, even now the revelations that have come out today about schools, etc.? Tell me, and I'll see you in 2.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company till 7, and alongside me I've got Martin Daubney, the former Brexit Party MEP, and Aaron Bastani, who's the founder of Novara Media. I'll echo again, lots of appreciation for you two coming in on my social media and the inbox, so thank you for that. We've just been talking about Lee Anderson. Is he right, basically, when he says people are not resourceful enough these days when it comes to helping themselves? Gary says, of course Lee is right, Michelle, and to make it worse, the pandemic has compounded many people's expectations that the state should bail them out of any difficulties. I've got to say, I agree with you on that. Graham says food banks should always be means tested. I have to say, many of them, you do need to get a referral. I mean, how stringent those referrals are, I'll leave that up to you to guess. Tom says Lee Anderson is, as usual, on the money. People get used to a very high level of comfort and then they fall to pieces when they're left to try and figure out how to deal with rough times. Is there anyone that disagrees with him? Is there anyone out there that thinks actually is talking absolute tripe? Get in touch, GBviews at gbnews.uk. Right, did you watch yesterday? We did the first part of the so-called lockdown files all over the Daily Telegraph, sold by the journalist Isabel Erkshot, criticised by some, actually, by the way, for sharing that all information. Anyway, the instalment today, it's all focused on teachers, basically, and whether or not Hancock overruled the advice when it came to shutting schools and for how long, etc., to keep them shut. Also, there was a conversation that was featured among these kind of leaks, and it really pricked my ears up, so it did, because I think it was, quite frankly, bizarre. It was all about can pets spread the disease, and what it was saying, Aaron, you'll be familiar with it, is it was saying that actually they considered looking at whether or not people should be asked to kill, for example, their cats to stop the spread of COVID. Obviously didn't happen. Your cats are safe. Don't worry if they're watching this with you now. But to me, it highlights the lunacy of some of the thought processes that were going on. People that say they don't care about this stuff is beyond me. Where do you stand on it?
Well, I saw the headline. I thought my dog would have been very unhappy if there were no cats left to bark at. He would have been, you know, gutted. It is a very strange headline for a number of reasons, but also what you just said there, I hadn't thought of it until now. The idea that the cats' owners themselves would have had to implement this. I mean, how would it have been?
Who would do it?
Who would have, you know, how would it have been executed? Quite literally, would there have been, you know, the police going from door to door searching people's houses? I mean, it sounds incredibly macabre. I would say, look, if you have something like Ebola, which kills 30–40% of people that get it, OK, we can talk about these kinds of measures because it's going to kill a lot of people. Clearly, with COVID, things were never that bad. I was a supporter of lockdown to an extent. I think when you have a new pathogen, you don't know how lethal it is. I think it's sensible to be cautious. But something like this, I mean, killing tens of millions of animals just in case, I mean, that's a big step. And it does make you think, if that had happened, what would have been next? You know, where's the red line here? Open question. I mean, I'm sure your audience have many thoughts on it.
My audience will be shouting at me. In fact, I can almost hear you. If you're doing what you was doing to me last night, my ears will be on fire in a minute because I will be able to hear you shouting at me. People were not happy about this lockdown file. People are saying this is just a witch hunt against Matt Hancock. He's been proven guilty before he's even had a fair trial. Move on. That was the sentiment I was getting from people yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, there are many people that feel that Matt Hancock shouldn't be in the jungle. He should be, you know, in jail. And people have very strong opinions on that separate matter. But back to this story. In politics, we're used to dead cat stories, aren't we? But this one really takes the biscuits, literally. The concept that without any data to go off, without any evidence that this is even something of substantial worth or merit, the idea that it's being discussed in one of these kind of war rooms, these Cobra meetings, I think just shows us the absurdity. I echo your point there, Aaron, of where we are at. Let's become a nation of cat colours, just in case. And I told my kids this story this morning, because I talk to my kids that they're 8 and 13. And I always talk to my...
Have you got a cat?
We have got a cat.
Oh, God, you will traumatise your poor kids.
No, I always talk to them about challenging power and being healthily kind of sceptical of politicians. I say that having been one myself. And this story...
Fascinating breakfast chat around the old Daubney household.
It is like that. You know, this morning we talked about the lockdown files, and I always say to them, challenge authoritarianism, not because it's the de facto position, but use data to cross-examine claims. This claim...
You say that to your 8-year-old?
I do,
How old's your other one?
13.
Oh, I thought you said 4. I was going to say, OK, I'll let you off.
Dolly is 9 tomorrow. She's watching, Louis Don. So I think this is an example of how they collectively lost their tiny minds and actually thought this idea had merit. OK, they're denying it was ever going to get implemented. But the fact it was on the table, I think we would look back at the great COVID psychosis that envelops our political classes, and this really takes the biscuit.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at one of my viewers who's just got in touch. And I don't mean to be rude, it just made me chuckle. You said, well, I've never had COVID and I have 0 cats. So maybe, after all, there was some truth in it. Come on now, everybody. Goodness gracious me. Look at the time. It absolutely flies. This lockdown file, it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So I suspect there'll be lots of revelations coming out. I will keep looking at it because I think that in life, you've got to make sure that actions that affect your life, our life, all of our lives are proportionate so we never end up in that situation ever again. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your company.
Debate. Thank you.
We very much enjoyed it, and I know you have at home, so thank you for your company too. Have a fantastic night, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow, and up next is Nigel Farage.
Good evening, my name is Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So as we go towards the end of the week, there's not much change, with it being another rather cloudy day tomorrow with some light showers around. And this is all due to high pressure that we've seen dominating the UK weather over the last week or so. It's not going anywhere for another day, but as we go through the weekend and into next week, we might just start to see a change. But looking through this evening, it's quite a cloudy night with plenty of cloud around for central and eastern areas. And this will spread southwestwards through tonight, so becoming increasingly cloudy. But there will be some clearer spells across Scotland, West Wales and southwest England, where we could just see a patchy frost to start Friday. So it'll be a rather cloudy start for many to end the week, but we will start to see some sunnier spells developing down eastern coast throughout the day, particularly as we get into the afternoon. So there will be some sunny spells around for some, but in any thicker bits of cloud, we might just see the odd light shower as well into tomorrow. But temperatures will be feeling pretty pleasant in the sunshine and around average for the time of year. Now, with clearer spells to end the day on Friday, we might just see a touch of frost forming quite early across some central and eastern areas. But cloud will swiftly move in from the east once again. So by the time we start Saturday, frost will mostly be across Scotland and higher ground over England and Wales. So just a patchy frost to start the weekend there. Otherwise, as we go into Saturday, we draw our attention to this band of showers to the northeast. That's going to bring showers down northern and eastern coast through Saturday. And these could be wintry over some higher ground as it marks a change to some more northerly winds, bringing some colder weather across the whole of the UK by the time we get through to next week. But for the rest of the weekend, some sunny spells around, but wintry showers starting to show their hand too, and temperatures around average.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The lockdown leaks, it goes on and on. Now we learn there was a furious row about whether we should close the schools back in January 2021. Matt Hancock was all for it. He won. We did close the schools. Was it the right thing to do? We'll discuss that. We'll look forward to CPAC, which I'll be at tomorrow, the big Conservative conference taking place just outside Washington, D.C. Donald Trump will be the dominant speaker there. Ron DeSantis won't be there. We're going to try tonight to find out more about who Ron DeSantis really is. And also, 2,000 more pubs are threatened with closure. How on earth are we going to save the great British pub, without which our country would not be the same? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story at 7 o'clock. MI5's Director General says he's profoundly sorry that the security agency didn't prevent the Manchester Arena bombing following the inquiry into the attack. The report found the security service failed to act on critical intelligence relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi. It also found it could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. A lawyer for the family spoke outside the inquiry. He said the victims had been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Well, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says MI5 has made changes since the attack.
I know that all of us are working to make sure that the improvements that need to be made are made. Already more than 100 changes have been done, and no doubt this report will highlight others. The Home Secretary and I support MI5 in making those changes.
Meanwhile, officials in Syria believe they have enough evidence to convict Shamima Begum if an international criminal tribunal is set up. Following a visit to Kurdistan, the Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle said authorities there asked him for a tribunal to be established to try also thousands of former IS fighters and their families. Shamima Begum was 15 when she left London to join the Islamic State terror group. Here, police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in Woodland, close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or the welfare of their baby. They're being held on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. And NHS leaders have welcomed a government decision to invite all health unions involved in strike action to further talks. The Health Department says it'll discuss what is fair and reasonable, but that planned industrial action must be called off first. The Royal College of Nursing began intensive discussions with the government last week over pay, but unions representing junior doctors described talks with the Health Secretary today as a facade and said action would go ahead later this month. That's all from me for now. I'm back in an hour. More now from Farage.
Well, the Daily Telegraph lockdown leak story is now in day 2. And the big stories today, well, the first was that we decided we'd make kids wear face masks in school because Nicola Sturgeon had gone ahead and done it first. And Boris Johnson said, we don't need the fight, we don't need the row. So our poor kids were made to go to school for some period of time wearing face masks. But the really big story that's come out overnight is that Matt Hancock was absolutely desperate to close the schools if we go back to January 2021. Despite the fact that very, very few people who were young were getting ill with coronavirus, Hancock feared Kids going back to school would mean there'd be an intergenerational spread. Sir Gavin Williamson, who was the Education Secretary, was absolutely opposed to the schools being closed. In the end, Hancock won and the schools were closed. And actually, for a lot of our youngsters, 2 years of normal education, 2 years of normal social interaction were lost. So I'm asking you tonight, were we right to close the schools? Give me your thoughts, farage@gbnews.uk. I think it was an absolute disaster. Is it any wonder that we have an increasing number of kids genuinely suffering from not just mental problems, but social problems too, and very behind in terms of academic development at schools? It was just awful, in my opinion. So, you know, I may not like the way all these emails have been leaked. I may not approve of it, but it is giving us some very powerful stories. And interestingly, yesterday I read out a statement that had come from Matt Hancock and his team defending what had happened in the care homes, saying the Telegraph hadn't quite got it right. That was what the Hancock camp had to say. On this row about closing the schools, we have not heard a word from Matt Hancock and his team, other than to say they're going to wait for the inquiry. When on earth is that inquiry going to be? Well, joining me now is Catherine Foster, GB News political reporter. Catherine, I can see, you know, from right across politics and media, people saying, well, whilst they're quite enjoying these Telegraph stories, is there any news? Because I hear that the inquiry, the COVID inquiry, have spent nearly £1 million so far of taxpayers' money and not yet interviewed a single British government minister. Is there any hope or prospect this might get speeded up?
Honestly, Nigel, I would say don't hold your breath, because Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, asked in Prime Minister's questions for a commitment from the government that the inquiry would be concluded this year. That was not forthcoming. Of course, the Prime Minister's spokesman says this is independent, you know, they will take the time that they need. But of course, in other countries, these inquiries into lockdowns have long since concluded. Sweden, for instance, that was wrapped up last year. France and Germany, they've already done these and got them out of the way. And in many ways, it's in the government's interests to let this drag on as long as possible. I mean, it could potentially be years. And that, of course, is why Isabel Oakeshott, the journalist who's leaked all these WhatsApp messages, is saying she's done so because she's saying it's in the public interest for this information to come out now.
Yeah, two other stories. While you're there, in the Westminster Village, two other stories. Firstly, Boris Johnson coming out and saying he may not be able to vote for Rishi's deal. And I've noticed, and we've been covering this for the last couple of nights, but I've noticed in the newspapers increasingly people saying that actually the Prime Minister has oversold the Windsor Framework Agreement. I'd like a quick thought on that and what Boris may do and how big the rebellion can be. But also, astonishing that Sue Gray, the neutral, independent civil servant that carried out the inquiry as to what happened in number 10 Downing Street with the passes, we now hear is off to become Chief of Staff for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. What does that mean for civil service neutrality?
Yes, incredible news about Sue Gray, wasn't it? She had a high position in the Cabinet Office as a civil servant up until today, when she said she was resigning. She was told to go with immediate effect, as of course she would be, because she's now going to be Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, leader of the opposition. Now, Keir Starmer wants somebody with massive experience of government, which of course Sue Gray has. They realise that they've got very little government experience in the shadow cabinet. But really, of course, this does mean that lots of people will now be saying, well, what about civil service impartiality? If she's gone off to join Labour now, was she really impartial over the Partygate allegations, which helped to bring Boris down? And talking about Boris Johnson, yes, I was at his speech. He has come out and been very critical, really, of the Prime Minister's deal, said that it was basically similar to what Liz Truss had been offered last year, that the EU were graciously unbending to let us do things in our own country but still being under their laws. And that really, he said, it was going to be a drag anchor on divergence, and what was the point of Brexit if we couldn't go off and do our own thing. So it will be interesting to see what effect that has, although he did say he'd find it very difficult to vote for. That was an implication, obviously, that he'd vote against it. But he also said he could see the way the wind was blowing, that he understood that people wanted a deal and that they would have to hope that it worked.
Catherine Foster, thank you very much indeed. And Boris Johnson there, I suppose we can say, really sitting on the fence. He's rather good at doing that before he makes big political decisions. He does like to see which way the wind is blowing. Back to the school story. You see, what's clear to me about this row that took place between Hancock and Williamson is that the decision to close the schools, this was more of a political decision than it was a scientific decision, because scientific opinion was genuinely split on the issue. We'd been told from the start the government would follow the science. I don't think Matt Hancock was following the science at all. Well, I'm joined by Christine Cunniff, who's the principal at LVS Ascot. And Christine, you know, I have to say, you know, for you there running a school, when you see this schoolboy-style squabble that was going on at the beginning of 2021, and there you are, responsible for kids in schools, as so many other thousands of people like you were. How does it make you feel?
Well, it was actually quite disbelief this morning when I saw it, but to be quite honest with you, not surprised. I mean, I do remember that time when some schools came back for one day and then they were out again as well. And the heartache that caused the children, you know, it's just not on. And to see those messages, we're trying to set an example to children to be leaders of the future. Now, what message does that send to our young people?
Yes, in terms of leadership qualities, I mean, really, I have to say, right through the pandemic, it was more like followership than it was leadership. And clearly what these emails reveal is there were an awful lot of political battles going on as well. Christine, I think they were absolutely wrong to close the schools in 2021. I think they were absolutely wrong to make young children wear face masks. It was absolutely dreadful. But you tell me, as somebody directly involved in education, do you think great damage was done to our young people over that 2-year period? And if it was, can it be remedied?
I think hindsight is a wonderful thing. COVID was, you know, complete. It was a nightmare for everyone, and I think, you know, I believe, you know, the decisions were made at the time what they thought was the right thing to do, but it was the wrong thing to do. And I think we need to learn about this, you know, especially if we were to have another pandemic, which could be, you know, literally just around the corner. We have to keep the children in school. The damage is extensive in all age groups. I mean, it doesn't matter how young children were. I mean, imagine children who never started that reception year and they're coming into year 1 and 2 and they haven't had that nurturing. But also older children. You know, my own son didn't take his A-levels. It had a huge, far-reaching effect on them, and we're still seeing that now. We're seeing it with attitudes, we're seeing it with behaviour, we're still trying to catch up. And, you know, and the children really have suffered, and I think we're going to see this for decades.
For decades, goodness me. So I'm going to give you an opportunity here, Christine. Would you like to send a message to Matt Hancock on behalf, not just of your school, but of educationalists across the country? Remember, it is before the watershed. I would like you, please, to try to keep it clean.
Of course, and I'm a head teacher, so I definitely will keep it clean. I would say these are children's lives, these are adult lives that you're playing with. And if ever we have a pandemic, I hope we learn from it and that we have people with the right qualifications and experience in the right place to lead our country into the future.
Christine Cunniff, thank you for being so diplomatic and for joining me tonight on GB News. And Christine, they're laying out, you know, clearly, you know, she thinks there could be damage to our young people and this could go on actually for decades. I find that really pretty depressing. Well, at about 10:30 tonight, we'll find out what tomorrow's front page in the Daily Telegraph is going to be. And I've no doubt, as these next few days go by, we will find out the extent to which government chose to try to frighten us. Ministers used the Coronavirus Act to put impositions upon our liberty and our freedoms that they didn't even dare do during the Second World War. There is a lot more to come out over the course of the next few days. I'll be back with you in a couple of minutes.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. For those that didn't listen to me last night, yes, I am in New York City, hence what you see behind me. I was supposed to be in Washington, D.C., but the flight was cancelled, so I came here instead. I'll be in D.C. tomorrow. Now, some of your thoughts coming in. Was it right to close the schools? Nick says, no, Sweden had the right idea, but what is not being talked about is the flawed model is the same model that is being used for climate change. And these messages prove they do indeed fudge the data to suit their agenda. Gosh, Nick, you're even more cynical than I am. Michael says, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Yeah, Michael, I get that, of course. Of course, it's easy to look back and criticise. But I think what today's revelations show is the extent of the political battle that was going on within Cabinet, not a scientific one to deal with the disease. And that, I think, is what genuinely shocks people. And just think of those kids, as Christine said, those kids that went back to school for one day and were then told the schools were closed. All of that was disastrous. Another viewer says, no, students lost social skills, academic skills, and became fearful, apathetic, and hopeless. Currently, they don't see much of a future for themselves, and they lack the skills to navigate life's challenges. Well, I have to say, I I, for one, do genuinely think this did huge, huge damage to young people. And I'll take one more. Tessa says, easy to say no 2 years down the line. All the government were doing was trying to save lives. Even if they made mistakes, wouldn't we all have done the same? Tessa, I'll be honest with you, when that first lockdown came, and I had friends in Milan, in northern Italy, telling me what was happening in their hospitals, what was happening in their communities, I was pretty scared of what was coming down the track, and I had no objections to the first lockdown whatsoever. We didn't know what was coming down on us. But by the time we get to early 2021, we knew that the only people that died with coronavirus on their death certificates were people with an average age of 83, which is higher than normal life expectancy in the UK, and or, in many cases, people who were suffering from very bad health, pre-existing heart conditions, or extreme obesity. We knew by that time that most people that caught it got over it pretty quickly, and yet we kept going back into repeated lockdowns. So I'm not speaking on this with hindsight. I have to say, by the time the second and third lockdowns came, I was completely opposed to what the government was doing. And I was watching what was happening in Sweden, and indeed what was happening in Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis. I might mention him in just a moment. Now, terrorism, or more accurately, our counter-terrorism strategy, has come under some really pretty strong scrutiny in the last couple of weeks. We've just had the Manchester inquiry, the third inquiry into that horrendous suicide bomber who killed 22, mostly young kids, at that concert. And I have to say, the report just tells us about failure after failure. Salman Abedi was not referred to the PREVENT programme, and MI5 are being pretty frank in saying that he should have been. But even if he had been referred to PREVENT, we learnt last week from the Shawcross report that even PREVENT doesn't seem to be working properly. And bizarrely, 80% of the referrals to PREVENT are for right-wing extremism, whereas in reality, 80% of genuine police time dealing with terrorism comes from the Islamic threat. And perhaps because of all of this, our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has said that political correctness is actually stopping us from rooting out dangerous Islamic terrorism. Is she right? I have a sense that maybe she is. But Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, will, I've no doubt, have a better and much more informed opinion than I do. Chip, good evening. Welcome to the programme. I mean, all of these reports, it seems to me, are pretty damning. Suella, is she right to say that it's political correctness, or frankly cowardice, that means we're not dealing with the problem properly?
Well, I don't think she is, because, of course, if you're a practitioner in counter-terrorism, you follow the threat, not any political correctness. And it doesn't matter if it's left-wing, right-wing, Northern Ireland terrorism, or the fourth one now, left and single-issued terrorism. If it stacks up that it's from any of those groups, that's what you follow. And that's why, for example, 66% of those in prison are from the Islamist persuasion, 27% currently from the right wing, and the remainder from those left and single-issued terrorists. It's also not really true that PREVENT would have helped in the case of Abedi. So, for example, he was 20 when the statutory imposition came from the Safety and Security Act in 2015, which gave schools and universities and the NHS a mandatory statutory requirement to refer people they thought was vulnerable. I don't think he was in that system. So that wouldn't have helped, even though PREVENT has been in from 2003. So I don't think the thing is necessarily broken, and we've got to be really careful on how we look at this. But you follow the threat, not the ideology. That's what they do. Now, in the case of Abedi and the Manchester attack, you have to then go back to what was said afterwards. So about a week after, we, of course, had the London Bridge attack. As a result of that, the DDG, Deputy Director General of MI5, who was actually Ken McCullum at the time, now the Director General, led an operational improvement review. Did we get things wrong? And from the reports to that, which would probably feed in to the report of Sir John Saunders today, they said they got two things wrong. The first one was they could have potentially stopped him at a port, or the port's philosophy, that's ports, airports, train stations, under a Schedule 7. The second one is Abedi in 2014 was a closed subject of interest. He was a subject of interest from January 2014. He fell off the radar to become a closed subject of interest in July 2014. The most amazing thing, really, is that using big data, machine learning and artificial intelligence, they had picked him out from 20,000 closed subject of interest and were going to reinvestigate him and had actually put him on the radar for a meeting, but that was going to happen 9 days after the attack. So he was on the radar. Yeah. It wasn't in a timely fashion. But like all these things, we have to remember that sort of being on the radar is not the same as if you're on the prioritisation grid. And there are people who at the time were far higher than him, which they probably prevented. And as a result of these operational improvement reviews, of which there were 104 recommendations, the key thing about when they were implemented in 2019 is, are we safer today? Because, of course, sadly, it is 6 years on from Manchester. I would argue we are safer today. It's largely lone actor attacks. They're very difficult to stop, but large plots are largely gone now. So, for example, to put some figures on that, 2019, 2 were killed, 2020, 3 killed, 2021, 1 killed in terrorist attacks. So the heyday of terrorism has gone, although, of course, Northern Ireland-related terrorism, we saw that horrible attack on the PSNI policeman in Northern Ireland last week.
No, Chip, that's a really good, very good, and actually quite encouraging explanation of where we are with things. And of course, we don't hear about the good news. We don't hear, really, do we, about the attacks that are foiled. We hear about it when it's gone wrong. One final thought is that Suella Braverman did talk about grievance narratives, and this was very specific. And it was saying that if we investigate and look and start to criticise aspects of extreme Islamism, this gets taken by some elements of the media wrongly as being an attack on everybody of the Muslim faith, hence this grievance narrative. And what she was really saying is that when it comes to that particular terrorist threat, she thinks we're soft-pedalling. But you clearly don't agree with that.
Well, there's always been a strong prevent narrative, and that was really why it took so long for Shawcross's Prevent report to come out. Prevent is a good thing. It's to stop vulnerable people being drawn into radicalisation. If you're already radicalised, you wouldn't go into Prevent. You'd be in Pursue and be looked at by Counter-Terrorist Command and MI5. So Prevent isn't broken. It needs to be supported. And that was one of the things today that was actually said by Sir John Saunders, that the police welcomed and thought Prevent was a very, very good thing. It generally works. We need to support it. But there is a lobby of people who think that it is focused on the Islamic community. It is not. It's focused on all of those who seek to do harm to the UK of whatever persuasion.
Yeah. Chip Chapman, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening on GB News. Well, sticking with a fairly similar theme, my What the Farage moment from today, and you may have heard about this case, but it's a school just outside Batley in Yorkshire, and it involves a boy, it involves 4 boys, and one of them brought in a copy of the Quran, and the copy of the Quran got dropped and trodden on. It didn't get burnt or set fire to, as some of the sort of wilder reports suggested. But this was, and it probably was lads larking about. But this was taken to be causing terrible, terrible grievance. And we finished up with 4 boys being suspended from the school. One of the mothers has spoken out, making it clear that her 14-year-old didn't have any malicious intent, but these boys aren't currently at the school. And I just wanted to muse on something. Can you imagine if somebody, from whatever faith, had brought a Bible, the Holy Bible, into school, and the Bible had been dropped, trodden on, or damaged in some way? Do you think those kids would have been suspended? I don't. It does show a very mixed sense of priorities in what is supposed to be, or at least used to be, a Christian country. We'll take a break. Back with you in 2.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, let's do a happy story. Let's do something that really thrills me and cheers me up. Now, of course, we know we must never, ever criticise. Never, ever criticise Meghan and Harry. That's a terrible mistake. And if you're Jeremy Clarkson and you write something rude about them in the Sun newspaper, even when you've apologised, you find announced last night that he will not be doing, after the next one, any more series of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. No, 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 no. If you criticise this couple, you get in trouble, because they seem to have quite deep support in the liberal media establishment. But anybody who watches this show regularly or listens to it will know I think their behaviour has been absolutely disrespectful to our late Queen and despicable towards his own brother and indeed his father, who of course is now King Charles III. They moaned like crazy, didn't they, about being put into Nottingham Cottage after they were first married. It was so small. Oh, you know, American stars coming to visit them couldn't believe the terrible conditions they were being forced to live in. Oprah Winfrey said, it's so small. Gosh, I'm sure you're all really pitying them living there. But the Queen came to the rescue and gave them Frogmore Cottage. Now, Frogmore Cottage are 5 houses knocked into one, and £2.4 million was spent for the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk to have it decorated to their heart's desire. So really, they've been having their cake and eating it, because they've been living on the west coast of America, making vast amounts of money from the book and from Netflix and everything else, slagging off the royal family, the Commonwealth, virtually everything about our country, but able, at will, to come back to Frogmore Cottage. Well, the King has acted. And I don't always agree with everything the King says, as you know. But he's kicked them out. He wants the keys back. Yes, they will not have Frogmore Cottage anymore. And it will go to Andrew, who, for him, and it must be horrible for him, really, to have to leave a 30-room home. But hey, he's going to go into Frogmore Cottage. Well, maybe I'm being a bit light-hearted about this, because I do think, actually, there are deeper, perhaps even constitutional consequences from this. And I'm joined by Rafe Hadel-Manku, royal commentator and GB News favourite. Rafe, some people have suggested that this is revenge coming from King Charles. If it is revenge, I have to say, I rather like it.
Yes, well, about time, I'm sure many will say. And I'm sure that, cries of finally could be heard ricocheting around the kingdom, as the British public heard about the King's decision, decisive decision, I should say, to give the Duke and Duchess of Duplicity their final just desserts and to evict them. The King's been extraordinarily patient and tolerant. I think we can all agree. And much like a good Christian monarch would, I think he was hoping that there would be a prodigal son moment where his wayward son would return. But after all the temper tantrums we've seen from this crybaby and his delusional drama queen of a wife, it appears that it was the publication of Spare, Harry's vulgar memoir, that issued these vile attacks on Queen Camilla. That was the final straw for His Majesty. And the thing is, the King and the royal family aren't allowed to actually rebut or respond to any of this vile nonsense from Team Sussex. What the King has done here, actually, I was thinking about it, is sort of the equivalent of a government declaring a diplomat persona non grata. When an ambassador is declared persona non grata, they lose their residence and they lose their privileges and they have to leave the nation. And that's essentially what the King has done to Prince Harry, because this is actually quite a masterstroke. The practical reality is that he's not only evicted them from Frogmore, by losing Frogmore, they've actually lost their royal roles, which we'll discuss constitutionally, and essentially potentially been evicted from Britain. Because if you lose Frogmore, Harry's now lost his domicile status in the UK. And what that means constitutionally is that he can no longer be a councillor of state. And a councillor of state is a very important constitutional role, which means when the sovereign, the King currently, is incapacitated or abroad, there are 4 senior royals who can fulfil certain functions of the King. And Prince Harry has been one of those councillors of state. But without any UK domicile, he's been very publicly and unceremoniously stripped of that. But also, the other thing is, by losing Frogmore, he's now lost the Windsor Castle Estate's Royal Protection Police officers and security detail, which means that he now feels that his only safe space in the UK has been denied him. And we've heard them say repeatedly, and it's been reportedly said by his supporters like Omid Scobie over the past couple of days, that they now may limit their number of trips to the UK. If they would actually come to the coronation, we'll see. So by losing Frogmore, they've lost their royal role, and potentially they've been evicted from Britain too.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Rafe. As I say, there is an important constitutional point here, and thank you for putting that very clearly to everybody. Let's just focus for a minute, if we can, on the coronation. It's about 9 weeks away, but it really is coming up very, very quickly upon us. As I understand it, an invitation has been extended to Harry and his wife Meghan, but they have said they will only come to the coronation if they're given an apology. I mean, I can't believe this, but this is what I'm told. If they're given an apology by William, Kate and the King. Is that about where we are?
Yes, so the invitation hasn't yet been confirmed as being sent or received, but we're expecting this to happen. But you're quite right. I don't know what life is like on planet Sussex, but they seem to live in this alternative reality where up is down and left is right. I mean, it's quite inconceivable that you would launch a hail of abuse and attacks upon your nearest and dearest and then expect them to apologize. And you have to really ask, what are they apologizing for? I mean, Harry should be lucky and Meghan should consider themselves lucky that they're even getting an invitation to this great ceremonial event. Unfortunately, I think the problem is if they do accept this invitation, a lot of the media attention, which should be on the most important ceremonial and constitutional event our country has, the first coronation in 70 years, all focus should be on the King. And I just hope that we don't get this sidetracked distraction of Harry and Meghan and their ongoing fracas, and turning the coronation into Coronation Street or something, if I could say.
No, I get that. Well, I hope they don't come. If they do, they'll be booed in the street. I know, because I'll be queuing outside to boo myself. But you said the coronation's all about the king. But a final thought, if I may, while I've got you. We have learnt over the last few days that Camilla absolutely will not be the Queen Consort. She is going to be the Queen. And what I found interesting about that statement was there didn't appear to be any pushback against the idea at all. Do you think she's actually managed to win, despite a pretty rocky start, over the hearts and minds of the British public?
I think absolutely right. I mean, it must be said that Queen Camilla became queen the moment that her husband acceded to the throne. She's Queen Consort with a small Q and a small C, but there's no official title of Queen Consort. She is officially the Queen. But what the palace has done very, very cleverly and I think very correctly is they've allowed the public to get used to the idea of a Queen Camilla in stages. So, of course, we first heard the Queen say that she hopes that the public will accept Camilla as Queen Consort. And then, of course, to avoid confusing having two queens so close together, Queen Elizabeth and Queen Camilla, quite rightly, I think we've had for this period references to the Queen Consort, even though she is really Queen. And then from the coronation, we will finally drop the consort and regard her as Queen. And yes, this has been a long process over the past 20-odd years of getting to know Queen Camilla, and everyone who's met her will say that the same thing, that she's extremely funny, down to earth, really unlike the sort of roles you would expect. The key task for the royal family and the monarchy is to impart that same feeling we now have for Queen Camilla around the Commonwealth realms, where they don't know her so well and where she still is an unfamiliar figure. And unfortunately, 25 years after Diana's death, whenever there's a royal tour of Canada, Diana is brought up yet again after a quarter of a century. And I just hope now, finally that will be put to bed. People will see her for the woman she really is.
Rafe, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. As usual, informative and entertaining too. Now, folks, a bit of breaking news. I said to you earlier on that the Daily Telegraph will be getting ready for their next big headlines. Well, one of them that's popped up already that'll be in tomorrow's newspaper seems to involve me. The headline is, "Can we lock up pub hooligan? Nigel Farage asks Hancock's team." Team wanted to take action against Brexiteer when he tweeted video of himself in a Kent pub after travelling to attend a US Trump rally. All right, okay, here we go. I'm going to fess up. When the first lockdown came, I thought, all right, I will accept that this vile Coronavirus Act has gone through the House of Commons, giving ministers powers we've not seen since the time of medieval kings. I didn't like it, but I obeyed it. But when I saw lockdown after lockdown, when I saw hysteria surrounding the number of times we all had to get jabbed, when I saw a media earning so much money out of advertising that there was almost no room for debate or criticism, and when I saw Matt Hancock standing up there and saying things like, "This is an order, you must stay at home," I thought, as the months went on, the hell with you. This is absolutely ridiculous. You're telling me I can't even go fishing. I can't even go on my own and sit, on a beach somewhere and fish. This is crackers. And frankly, I began to just not comply. And did I go and visit elderly relatives that I shouldn't have done under the law? Yes, I did. And I bet many of you did too. Did I meet the odd person for a drink in the garden when we weren't allowed to? Yes, I did. And I bet many of you did too. And that particular picture, when I had been to America, I was supposed to quarantine, I think, for 14 days. And was I, when I was photographed that day the pubs open, had I reached the full 14 days? Well, it was a bit nip and tuck. I think probably I hadn't quite reached the time. But you know what? Wherever I did, whatever I was doing when I was out there breaking these ludicrous rules, I always made sure I used hand sanitizer. I always kept my distance from people. And I have to say, bad laws make people lawbreakers. So there we are. I've fully confessed. If you think the worst of me for it, I'm sorry. But I just don't like tyrannical government. I don't like little pipsqueaks like Matt Hancock telling me how I should live my life. On that note, we'll take a break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
So I'm going to be at CPAC, this big Conservative conference, for the next couple of days, and of course the star attraction is going to be Donald Trump. He comes every single year and speaks to grassroots Conservatives, just as Ronald Reagan did before him. The Trumps, well, they just never bothered because they were rather too establishment to go out and meet the great unwashed. Ron DeSantis won't be there tomorrow. He's governor of Florida. My guess is that he probably is going to have a run, and my guess is he doesn't want to take on Donald Trump too early. But we did learn something about DeSantis over the course of the last couple of days through the Times newspaper, doing a big interview. And what was interesting was, it's the first time I've really heard him. I mean, I've met him before, but it's the first time I've heard him come out publicly saying he's a big supporter of Brexit. He views Brexit and Brexiteers rather like the founding fathers of America when they broke away from us. But his comment on how Brexit's been applied really interesting. He says, my impression, based on what we get here, is that the Conservative Party hasn't been aggressive at fulfilling that vision as they should have been, and that maybe they'll get punished in the next election as a result of that. I do think that, you know, there's been some disappointment from what I can tell that it hasn't been done more aggressively. Well, here. Seems to me Ron DeSantis has his finger very much on the pulse of UK politics, and whilst he may be a state governor, He's running Florida very well. And that means, and yes, of course, I'm a friend and supporter of Donald Trump. You all know that. But it does at least mean the Republican Party have actually got some quite good people to choose from, far better than the Democrats. Now, I'm worried about the closure of pubs. The one closest to my house closed just a few weeks ago. We're told there are 2,000 pubs on the verge of closing. It worries me because not just are they community hubs, but every pub is a parliament. It's in pubs where we openly debate things and think about things and often have our minds changed. How serious is this and what can be done? Well, Simon Cleary is the landlord of the Plough in Great Chesterford in Essex. Simon, twofold really. Number one, and I'm seeing it, living in Kent, not that far south of the river from you. Number one, how bad is this crisis? But number two, is there anything Jeremy Hunt can do in the budget on the 15th of March that might help to alleviate the problem?
Well, Nigel, it's very bad. And before we talk about that, can I just go back to your previous point about lockdowns? Lockdowns were horrendous for pubs. We had no income for nearly 8 months. We ended up with a bounce-back loan of £25,000 that we're now paying back on a monthly basis. And I don't know if your producers have told you this, but we're actually giving up. We're leaving this pub in 8 weeks' time to put some... Well, I've spoken to you before, Nigel. Yeah. When I've spoken to you before, we were talking about what may happen with energy bills. Let me give you some figures, Nigel. Our gas bill in 2022 for January was £438, including the swindly environmental charge and VAT. Our gas bill that we received for January this year was £2,370, nearly 5 times as much. And there it is right there. Plus the additional historic debt we have, COVID, and it's just not sustainable. And it is with great regret that we're going to be leaving this pub in 8 weeks' time.
Well, Simon, I didn't know that, and yes, I have spoken to you before about these problems, and I'm very, very, very sorry to hear that. I genuinely am sorry to hear that. Is the pub trade finished in this country?
No, it's not. There are. It's very much location, like anything else. The big pubcos will put their support behind their managed houses. Tenanted and leased properties, I think, are going to suffer worst. And the other two things that are coming up, the budget, as you know, Nigel, is the 15th of March. And your question about what Jeremy Hunt is going to do is very prevalent. So at the moment, we're on reduced business rates, which is a hangover from COVID, which has been welcome. What's Jeremy Hunt going to do with business rates? We don't know. The energy relief scheme comes to an end on the 31st of March. Is he going to extend that? Now, he did say at the end of last year there will be provisions made for particular struggling or affected businesses, but there's no meat on the bones of that. Nobody knows what that actually means. I know from speaking to my contacts in the pub industry that people are very, very worried, and indeed, depending on what Jeremy Hunt decides on the 15th of March, it's going to affect big companies like the company we're with, Green King. We don't have a problem with Green King. They've treated us reasonably well over the time we've been here. But they're looking at problems that could amount to tens of millions of pounds in the short term.
Simon, thank you very much for being a regular guest with me here on GB News. I'm desperately sorry to hear what's happened to your pub. I really mean that. And good luck with whatever you choose to do next. Thank you.
OK, thank you, Nigel.
Well, there you are, folks. That's modern Britain. That's modern Britain. That's what's going on. Time for a quick barrage the Farage. Mick asks me, does the country need a parents' union so action can be taken against schools which seek to poison the minds of children they teach? Well, I thought what was happening yesterday with that drag queen telling 11-year-old kids there are 73 genders and that girls can take a piece of skin off their arm to make a fake sexual organ, I'll leave it at that, was sick. I'm in America here. They have elected school boards. Parents can actually stand for school boards and fight back against this stuff. It is a damn sight harder in the United Kingdom to do that. So maybe whether a parents' union is the answer, I don't know. But Mick, what I do know His parents need more of a voice. Well, we'll see what that Telegraph piece of my confession does. I don't suppose the long arm of the law is going to find me here in America. I'll be back with you, hopefully, on Monday. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. I'm sure everyone enjoyed your programme hugely. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up over the next hour. We're going to be looking at the Sue Gray defection from the independent civil service to the Socialist Party. Does that undermine the whole idea of an independent civil service? And does it mean that her report into Boris Johnson that brought him down is invalid? We're also going to read from fantastic Mr. Fox. But now, the weather.
Good evening, my name is Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So as we go towards the end of the week, there's not much change with it being another rather cloudy day tomorrow with some light showers around. And this is all due to high pressure that we've seen dominating the UK weather over the last week or so. It's not going anywhere for another day, but as we go through the weekend and into next week, we might just start to see a change. But looking through this evening, it's quite a cloudy night with plenty of cloud around for central and eastern areas. And this will spread southwestwards through tonight, so becoming increasingly cloudy. But there will be some clearer spells across Scotland, West Wales and southwest England, where we could just see a patchy frost to start Friday. So it'll be a rather cloudy start for many to end the week, but we will start to see some sunnier spells developing down eastern coast throughout the day, particularly as we get into the afternoon. So there will be some sunny spells around for some, but in any thicker bits of cloud, we might just see the odd light shower as well into tomorrow. But temperatures will be feeling pretty pleasant in the sunshine and around average for the time of year. Now, with clearer spells to end the day on Friday, we might just see a touch of frost forming quite early across some central and eastern areas. But cloud will swiftly move in from the east once again. So by the time we start Saturday, frost will mostly be across Scotland and higher ground over England and Wales. So just a patchy frost to start the weekend there. Otherwise, as we go into Saturday, we draw our attention to this band of showers to the northeast. That's going to bring showers down northern and eastern coast through Saturday, and these could be wintry over some higher ground as it marks a change to some more northerly